That's a massive 25% EBITDA margin. And the CFO of Teleperformance mentioned that language line continues to grow dramatically.
You can't actually start working on the dubbing or the subtitling until you get the materials from the customer for localization.
Welcome to SlatorPod again, the weekly podcast where we talk about the multi-billion-dollar business of translation, localization, and language technology. Hello from Zurich.
Hi from London.
All right. So quick promo to get this started. So still, we got an amazing sales and marketing report for LSPs available on our website. Go check it out. As I mentioned last week, it's selling like...
hotcakes.
I don't know. What's the appropriate thing in English?
Hotcakes.
Hotcakes, yeah.
Hot cakes. Hot
cakes, yeah.
Salmon. Something like that. Selling like salmon.
It's selling like salmon without the L.
Looks like sockeye salmon.
Sockeye salmon. I couldn't let go, so I Googled this again, and yes, there is no L. There is no dialect or variety in English that has an L.
Good to know. Glad we solved that one.
Bubble shattered. Imagination. Anyway, so, all right, today we're going to talk about the remote interpreting boom, no matter the variety of remote interpreting. There's like 3 or 4. And I'm going to talk about how Hollywood's pause is disrupting certain parts of the media localization industry. We're going to talk something that's very kind of academic and not so business like we usually talk about. That's kind of semantic concepts. Are they equal across languages? That's the very shortest version. I know it's very much more complex, but we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about good times and bad times for LSPs. So, but first, I was very... I got a lot of warm feelings yesterday because I went to my former university out in a smaller city called Winterthur here in the canton of Zurich. I did an interview for them. They will use this for their graduate program and enrolling students. Obviously now it's not it's not an easy time to enroll students anywhere, but I mean there's a lot of people applying because it's probably a little bit more difficult on the job market. So we recorded a video, very professional, a lot more professional setup than this one that we have here. It was like 2 cameras and we're standing on some type of podium. And,
nice.
I was chatting with the video producer about producing videos and podcasting. And she gave me a couple more tools that I'm not going to subscribe to because we're already set up on 3 different platforms now. But yeah, I mean, like it's I could see how like a professional video was produced, and I think I have a bit of an interest there. So it was interesting, and I kind of tried to paint a picture of this industry in 10 minutes. It was really condensed, and I'm actually looking forward to the outcome. Like you always want to add more. Was it in
English or in German?
In English.
Okay.
So yeah, the interviewer was she must have been American, and so yeah, we did that in English. I'd love to do this in Swiss German actually for once. Like I did this presentation in Germany late last year in German, but talking about this industry in Swiss German, that would be amazing. Maybe I should start like a Swiss German podcast.
So your life goals, yeah, let's make it happen.
I could do it, but it would get very few downloads. Maybe it would be so niche. Like
I know at least 2 other Swiss-speaking Germans in the industry.
Yeah, no, I do know, but
Swiss German-speaking people is what I meant to say in the industry.
There's a few. There's probably like 5,000 or something, but then they would all have to listen to the podcast to make it worth it, right? So
yeah.
But it would be so much easier. Anyway, so today we're going to go out and talk about remote interpreting having its moment. So there's 3 different types of remote interpreting. Can you walk us through those? And then, I'll talk a bit about what's going on in that area.
Yeah, so over the phone, interpreting, it does what it says on the tin, I suppose. It's the longest serving form of remote interpreting since obviously telephone's been around for much longer, and it involves patching in interpreters over the phone to speak and interpret for customers and users. And then we have the kind of video-led side of it. So you have VRI, video remote interpreting, sometimes also called virtual remote interpreting. And that is typically done on an iPad or on a standalone device. And you see that most commonly happening in hospitals, in the justice system, so kind of widespread-ish within public sector and also sort of the US private, healthcare sector at large.
Yeah.
And that's where you get sort of slightly better margins as well from the business, from interpreting. And then finally, RSI, so that's the remote simultaneous interpreting, which can often be confused with VRI, but actually it's the simultaneous piece which is kind of the key difference here, and that would be used, for example, at conferences and events, and it replaces the traditional on-site conference interpreter booths. That's what it seeks to do.
So it took me a while to get this actually. So the VRI, do you know if it's actually video remote interpreting? It's not.
I think it is, but
remote,
I
right?
have seen both when it's spelt out, but I think technically we agree that it's video.
Yeah, so video is like, maybe in the justice system or something, like there's a very sensitive discussion that you're going to have with somebody, and you can't really do this over the phone, or it's kind of awkward to do it over the phone, or in the health system particularly, right? I mean, you would still, in many cases, prefer probably having a person on site, but their video obviously adds a major dimension to it. And then in remote simultaneous, this is for conferences, right? Which obviously the physical conference have disappeared, but the online side is completely going bonkers, totally booming. And we're going to talk about later some of the beneficiaries of this. So this week and last week, we ran 2 stories around LanguageLine and Stratus Video. And they're part of these bigger conglomerates, right? Stratus is owned by AMN, has been owned now for about half a year, a little bit more. And LanguageLine has been owned for 4 years now by this call center company, Teleperformance. And when they report, they typically wrap their results into bigger units. But we still get to understand a bit more how these units fared. So for Stratus, we might have talked about it previously a little bit, but basically they said that after a slow start, minutes billed increased throughout the second quarter of 2020 and now exceeded pre-COVID levels by late June. So imagine that, right? So initially, when they pulled all those, what they called in the US, especially those elective procedures, I think it's called, right? When people just literally, unless you had a major illness or you had the coronavirus or were suspected of coronavirus, you didn't go to the hospital. So when that happened, the entire healthcare system pulled back, and a lot of the interpreting also pulled back. But quickly this rebounded, and they've seen a massive uptick in orders there. Actually, Stratus contributed $28 million in revenue in the second quarter, and really helped the entire company there, also on the margin side. And then on LanguageLine side, LanguageLine is very, very big. It's a couple of magnitudes bigger than Stratus, and they're kind of summarized in this, or they're under the specialized services unit, which also has this contact center. And they had their revenues of the whole unit was down 9% to like $316 million, but most of this was actually LanguageLine. And the CFO said that the EBITDA for the entire unit, EBITDA is this earnings before tax and amortization, all of these other special factors, was 82 million euros in the first half. So because this was mostly LanguageLine generates 82 million euros in profit in half a year, which is like 150. So this is the most profitable company in the language industry. It's more profitable, TransPerfect, more profitable than RWS. That's why they went for $1.5 billion when they sold in 2016. So that's a massive 25% EBITDA margin. And the CFO of Teleperformance mentioned that LanguageLine continues to grow dramatically. And also an interesting observation, he said that they actually have 26,000 individual clients. And no individual contract would like move the needle for the business, because one analyst, I think it was a UBS analyst, asked in the earnings call, hey, is there a particular contract that's coming online? Is that going to really make a difference? And then the CFO said, look, we have so many contracts, like no individual contract is large enough to really move the needle for the business as a whole.
Oh, wow.
But obviously, since they have so many, as they're picking up a few more thousand clients, the business is going to grow. And then what you mentioned before, actually also the CFO of the parent company also mentioned that VRI, virtual remote interpreting, is more profitable than OPI.
Video remote interpreting.
Video remote. What did I say?
Virtual.
Did I say virtual? Oh my god.
Virtual after we agreed it was video, but I don't know.
Oh my god. Okay. Yeah, it's video. So that's that. And then on the RSI side it's booming. So Kudo, that we spoke about this couple of podcasts back, they raised $6 million. But then we ran a press release by their Swiss competitor Interprify this week, and they said the bookings were up 6 times since coronavirus outbreak.
Wow.
Their business tripled in the second quarter of 2020. Imagine that. And their platform usage has increased 7-fold from the first quarter to the second quarter. So, that's great for them. I mean, I remember when they started out roughly at the same time as Slator, and we're actually, we were neighbors. Yeah, we were neighbors. So we, had a few coffees back then, and now they really have their moment. I mean, it's this is a major boost to them. They said that they've hosted hundreds of global organizations on Zoom, on WebEx, and similar platforms with remote interpreting provided by Interprify. What's interesting here is those interpreting platforms really need to become like an essential part of the whole web conferencing ecosystem, because they probably can't compete as a standalone web conferencing platform. But so now they need to become really an essential feature of this, Zoom, Teams, what have you, ecosystem, which probably didn't care much about interpreting before COVID-19. But now, since there's so much going on and there's so many global conferences happening, this is becoming an essential feature for them. So, whoever gets in with those big conferencing tools is going to have a bright future. And what we don't hear so much is about this whole kind of AI interpreting that maybe half a year ago was kind of, in these Microsoft showcases and Google things. I don't think many people are using, like, what do you call it? Like machine interpreting at this point in time.
You mean like with the kind of synthetic voices and
the stuff that we use one? Like we actually, in one of the earliest podcasts, we did a test, right? Where I said something in German and then like it translated it. Remember?
I do remember we've done a couple of those. Okay, I see what you mean.
So
I thought that was a speech to text thing though. What did we do?
No, that was
speech.
That was Skype. That was, okay. I said something and it immediately processed, or it was Google or something. I don't recall.
Yeah, we did both. We did one on Google and one on Skype, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think that's much. I haven't heard much about that. Who knows? Maybe for smaller things, but for professional conferences, I doubt anybody's using those tools.
Well, I think it's hard enough, isn't it, to get everything right, all of the logistics and everything that are happening while you're trying to do your online conference, etc. With something else like that, maybe it's just too much.
Yeah, and it doesn't work.
Yeah,
I guess
maybe that's probably the biggest. Yeah, probably the biggest thing. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work that well unless you have like a North American proper accent, or maybe your accent is like the default English. But if I said salmon with an L, I don't know. We probably wouldn't understand that I'm actually referring to salmon the fish, right?
I think I drop a few too many T's for my accent to be considered sort of, posh English.
Well, but you're close.
Correct English. Close enough. Okay, good.
Close, much closer than I ever will be. So moving to Hollywood, where not much has been happening. And that has repercussions for the language industry. So what happens there?
Yeah, well, like you said, not much. I mean, doesn't sound like much of a news piece, does it? But no, so I mean, this was a story that we published earlier this week. And initially, we had been wanting to reach out to SDI Media, who's obviously one of the biggest media localizers globally to find out a bit about their their first half of 2020 and their earnings. But I think obviously they're part of a publicly listed group, a Magica group listed in Japan. And I think they're slightly limited as to what they can share around financials and when. But what we did get was a very good and in-depth interview with the CEO of SDI Media, Mark Howorth.
Yeah.
And he spoke to us in a lot of detail about the operations and the impact really of the coronavirus and specifically kind of Hollywood shutdowns have had on the business in the past 3-4 plus months. I mean, long story short, they were doing pretty well ahead of the pandemic. So he was able to share that I think in the 6 months to March 2020, revenues were up about 5.5% to $110 million, and earnings were grew in double digits. So that was all he could really say about the financials specifically. Or he did give us also a bit of a heads up about what they are expecting from Q2 and Q3. So he said, for example, between March and June 2020, so that's their Q2, he said it will show a significant impact from COVID with revenue declines that could be 20% greater and negative earnings. So that's Q2. Q3, so from July onwards, looking somewhat more optimistic. He said there's a significant recovery versus Q2, primarily which is driven by pent-up dubbing activity. So there was obviously a lot of dubbing that could not happen in the spring when all of the studios were closed. So that's driving some demand now, but it's been being offset by a weaker, and this is his words, weaker than anticipated subtitling and a very weak theatrical business.
Theatrical business.
Theatrical business. Well, so they have, that is, so I think the way that they look at it, or the way he spoke to us about it, was there's the dubbing, there's subtitling, and then they also operate a separate unit which does marketing localization and movie trailers. So obviously that was suffering because as we're saying, Hollywood has been closed, movie theaters have been closed. So customers maybe that have been marketing or wanting to promote their theater releases are not doing so right now.
Okay, I understand. So basically, because later on we're going to talk about basically the pause of Hollywood production filtering through to a pause in a sense in the localization part of the supply chain, right? But with the theatrical business, it's literally stuff that's happening in the cinemas, and because globally, I mean, there's no cinema that's open, I guess, or very few.
Well, I suppose it does take time for them to create their promo video or their trailers. So that obviously happens at least a little bit in advance. So I don't think it's quite as instant as that. But then obviously once you realize that theaters are closed and they don't look likely to be opening everywhere anytime soon, people are not spending their marketing budgets on creating movie trailers or doing marketing for theaters. But he did say, interestingly, that because, obviously some video entertainment content is still being put out there, and some customers are now thinking a bit more about marketing for home entertainment or productions that are going straight to streaming. So that there is a bit of an opportunity there.
And from the media localization point of view, we talked about this when Zoo published results, right? They're the cloud dubbing company, and they said we're working a lot on these back catalog localizations, right? But SDI seems to be also more exposed to these, again, the big movies, the big the big blockbuster movies, right? Which aren't
and TV, but
and TV, and aren't being produced anymore. So can you tell us a bit more about the timelines here? So, this has been stopped in March, and how does this now filter through the supply chain?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll answer your question with his words. So, I mean, Mark said that they are currently seeing the impact of Hollywood's lack of new productions, that's what you're talking about, over the last 4 months. So it has been 4 months. So they are seeing that now as a problem. And he said the next few months will be very challenging as we wait for Hollywood to create new content. So there have been signs that Hollywood is restarting, and you were talking about some kind of very COVID-safe production.
The bubbles.
Yeah, which I haven't seen, but apparently it's starting to happen under very controlled circumstances.
I think it's like the NBA. At least that's what I'm hearing on all these US podcasts. Like you're taking these people and you kind of quarantine them, put them in a bubble so they don't meet anybody else. And then, after 2 weeks, you can be safe. They don't have coronavirus. So
Yeah, so I mean, Hollywood is restarting cautiously, and obviously production elsewhere as well. But I mean, what he was saying, interestingly, obviously, is not going to sort of all fill up the supply chain overnight just because Hollywood is now starting to make movies again from a localization perspective. He was saying we now need to wait for the new content to move through the supply chain, and he thinks it will take about 4 months for the supply chain to be refilled. And he was giving me some timelines here, basically saying, okay, 6 to 8 weeks. It takes 6 to 8 weeks typically to do a dubbing project, maybe 2 to 3 weeks for a subtitling project. Obviously, not likely to get paid until completion, but then obviously you can't actually start working on the dubbing or the subtitling until you get the materials from the customer for localization. And these, generally speaking, need to be kind of near final materials. So not only do they need to have done the filming, they need to have done, pretty much all of the post-production, etc., before it gets through to the media localizers. So he's expecting that, or hoping that volumes are going back to normal by November 2020, but he said obviously it's still very difficult to predict at this point.
Yeah, I always like when we get response from him or an interview. It's very frank. He's very it's very interesting. We had him in San Francisco at our conference SlatorCon in 2018 as well, and very interesting. Let's see.
It was brilliant. It was really insightful, actually.
It's a long article. We typically don't run that long, but this was just so much information. I think, and it's free, so people should really head over and read it if you're interested in this. I think the media side is, initially there was a bit more optimism, I think, also with there was this M&A for Plint, or the investment for Plint, and Zoo's share price was up quite a lot. I think now I think the optimism has been a little bit dampened. You also see it in Zoo's share price. I think they're going to have a bit of a tough year generally this year, or the jury's still out, but this was not a very optimistic take here by Mark. So back to normal in November. Oh my God, that's a rough year.
Well, he did say they were anticipating a very strong 2021. So I think there is hope.
We all hope it's going to be a strong 2021.
Yes.
And we get to travel. Actually, I booked a flight this week within Europe. I got nostalgic. I'm like, I'm booking a flight. It's confirming the flight. So, green shoots. Well, no, let's see. But really looking forward to this, actually. Very cautious optimism. So let's talk about something coming out of academia for once.
Okay.
And I gotta apologize in advance if I'm butchering this, but it is such an interesting concept, and it goes really to the heart of the translation industry, or of the activity of translation. So what am I talking about? Like a Princeton computer scientist they ran a study. They used an algorithm to determine whether translation equivalents really mean the same thing in each language. What do I mean? So they salmon is that salmon really lux? So when I'm looking at salmon, or when I'm hearing salmon in English and I'm hearing lux in German, does it evoke the same, exactly the same concept? Image, right? I mean, a proper noun is a little bit is kind of easy to understand, but there is there's an infinite amount of semantic concepts out there. So they looked at. They used machine learning to analyze and back translate and forward translate 1,000 concepts into 41 languages across 10 language families. And their conclusion was it is easier. Well, that's a no surprise conclusion, but it's easier to translate between two languages spoken by groups with similar cultures than between languages whose speakers have very different cultures, right? And they're saying also that, let me try to so there's apparently there's two viewpoints in this entire debate, right? One is the universalist viewpoint, where basically you're saying, well, concepts generally are integral to the human condition, and they exist independent of language or vocab, right? I mean, so you're thinking of a sun, you're thinking of a salmon.
The sky is the sky. Blah,
the
blah,
sky
blah.
is the sky, and of course, if you go further down, the complexity. But then there's a relative school of thought, as opposed to a universalist one, where they're saying that language really shapes how we're perceiving the world, right? Language vocabs are influenced by culture, and speakers come to understand concepts, categories, and types while learning the language. So So they're saying that they're basically in between, like they can't confirm either school with this study. That it's not a clear-cut result. But generally, I'm more of I guess, a relativist in that sense, and I think that's actually, and I'm trying to get to the point here, but I think it makes translation generally almost an impossible activity. And you have this traduttore traditore, like translator trader thing from Umberto Eco, right? Which basically you can't fully capture it because you're writing it in another language. So, and this is also why MT is struggling so much with this, because it's just never, it's not a mathematical equation. So. And in the business world, again, this makes it so hard to translate certain concepts. I mean, for example, when new things arrive, like for example, I mean, a lot of the business talk, when you speak German, you're actually losing quite a lot of English terms, because it's just it's too hard to create something that would evoke the exact same concept in German. Or you can try, but then it would sound really odd. So you're using the English, and you're kind of giving in, and you're giving up to trying to actually do a proper translation of that. So again, long story short, it's a bit rambly. I'm sorry for that, but go read that article. I think it's something that once in a while we need to remind ourselves that this is actually a very, very hard activity to do, and sometimes almost an impossible activity. And that's why highly educated translators continue to be in such high demand. So that was also my conclusion. By the way, when I talked at the university, provided some hope and optimism. Cool. So let's go to the earnings wrap. So we had, the second quarter is now quite some time behind. We looked at a couple of results there from some of the LSPs. One was Summa Lingua, which is the Polish company that their shares continue to trade, even though it's only 20% of the shares that continue to trade.
Yeah, I hadn't realized that, because I knew that they were publicly listed before, and then they had this private equity deal thing last year, and so I had just assumed that they would no longer be publicly listed. But like you say, it seems like they're still trading.
Yeah, the shares are trading because it actually would take quite a. They need to make an offer to the remaining 20% of the shareholders, individuals, and the private equity firm will probably eventually do that, but it's quite a lot of work to do that. So that still trades, which means they still have to publish results, which is interesting. So they had a great second quarter. They had a 20% increase in revenue, and that was mostly on data annotation. That Appen business, like language data annotation and life sciences. And they got that because they bought two companies in late 2019. So imagine that. That's a great move by Chris, the CEO. You buy a company, and that literally saves you the first half in 2020 because the business just takes off. So that was a good move. Not so well were things at Honyaku Center, the biggest Japanese translation company, their language service provider. They're down 20% on the revenue side. Interpreting totally evaporated. They said 95% of their interpreting business just is gone, and translation is down 15%. And now they're worth $40 million in market cap, which is less than half of their actual revenue base. So that is
it's not great.
That's extremely low. So maybe eventually someone's going to buy them. And then we also had a quick update on Lingo24. I think they're Edinburgh based. They had a good 2019, grew revenues by 3%. But in their annual report, which they published this week, they said that they budgeted a 35% drop in revenue in 2020, made some redundancies. And so that's a massive drop, 35% in revenues. We haven't seen this from the big ones, like the RWSs and the SDLs or the Transperfects, but this is an interesting kind of an data point from some of the mid-sized, smaller size to mid-sized LSP.
So that will take them down to about $10 million US dollars, as opposed to near 15, I suppose.
35% is a lot.
It is a lot.
It is a lot, and also it's interesting. we spoke about it before a couple of times, that LSPs are quite flexible in how they can adjust. So it's, there's some businesses, if you have a 35, 40, 50%, collapse in revenue, you may face the, insolvency eventually, right? But language service providers can scale down very, very quickly. So you can scale down, and then hopefully when business picks back up, you grow again. So I think they're going to be fine. I mean, they're pretty smart in terms of tech, and maybe they had a few travel clients too many. So I think they're going to be fine eventually. But yeah, interesting pro article. Go check it out if you're a subscriber. All right, now I'm going to go back and read the semantic alignment article again.
I did skim it before this, but it was. I think definitely needs a bit more thought and attention on my part.
A bit more thought and attention. Yeah, I actually bought that paper. That paper wasn't for free. It was a research paper. Okay. I paid $35 to nature.com because I was like that. I didn't really understand the summary, so I downloaded the full paper and handed it over to Seema. So she wrote that.
Though she did a very good job, I think, of kind of boiling it down and explaining some of the concepts. But it's still, I don't know, still a lot. There's still a lot in there. And I think I sort of drifted off about halfway because I started thinking about terms in French and in English, and do they evoke the same kind of things? And then I was thinking, just because I didn't say my 2 cents earlier, about the difference between the UK and the US culturally, and how, especially in a business environment, and legally very different. And it was like what George Bernard Shaw, who said we're two nations divided by a common language.
That's
so
right,
culturally incredibly different in a lot of ways, really.
Yeah. Exactly. You're right. Like, it's such an interesting topic, and like, we're both language people. Like, I'm reading this, and me too. Like, I'm drifting off. I'm like, oh, Swiss German and German. Like, do we mean the same when we talk about that particular thing, right? And obviously, when I was in China, I lived there. It was just it was so obvious. Like, no, we're not talking about the same thing. We may use the same term, but it's not the same thing. There's a lot of concepts that are literally untranslatable, and so. Good luck for the MT people doing that going forward. All right. Well, that's it for today. I hope our new podcasting tool held up, and will save the conversation. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week, and check in next Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye.